So I've experience with these steps, and I did it as a result of the first 30 or so years of my life running it on Andy's well, and started doing drugs and alcohol around 10 years old, so about 20 plus years, close to a quarter of a century almost, of using drugs and alcohol to modify the way that I feel. And later on, I was to find out in this chapter that I was going to use more than just alcohol and drugs. I would use sex too to modify the way that I feel. And I didn't realize that, and I did what I did because I knew what I knew. And I went through a lot of hardship. I caused a lot of hardship with other people, and I didn't realize why or how. But regardless of knowing how it works, just like recovery, if you act a certain way and think a certain way, you're going to get certain results. And roaring through the lives of others and hurting people left me feeling uncomfortable on a pretty regular basis. So, I didn't know the way out of that situation, and I tried for a long time to overcome drugs and alcohol and stop drinking and swearing off forever, like it talks about in the previous chapters. And I was successful for short periods of time, sometimes longer periods. Longer periods for me were several months at a time. Growing up in a very dysfunctional family, my dad was an alcoholic. I was one of 9 that I said, and probably at least half of us were active alcoholic drug addicts, and what a household for my mom to run. Very, very active house. Lots of police at the house often. I was in the paper often with the family name in the paper, and it wasn't in the sports section. And if I wasn't, one of my siblings were. So my mom would just constantly be shaking her head, and that as a teenager, just not coming home for days at a time, and just God blessed me with 4 teenagers I have now, or 3 teenagers and a 24-year-old. Now I get to see the other side of that. I get to see what it's like when you don't get a call, and full circle. So most of what I've learned about this process is in hindsight. It's in the rearview mirror. I didn't realize it as I was doing it. I tried as hard as I could to get sober. I used my best effort, and I'm a pretty stubborn person when I set my mind to something. Not even close to working on self-will. I tried therapists, counselors. I knew that from my dad's experience being an active alcoholic, very successful businessman, my dad was, and a very active alcoholic. So he'd work 60 hours a week and then not come home 1 day a week. Or just come home, dropped off by the police at that time. The police would drive you home. So he would just come home, and maybe another officer would be driving his car home and park it out front. And he would just come in and fight with my mom. And, so I learned. We learn our behaviors from people that mentor us. And that's what I learned. But what I also learned from my dad, that there was a place called AA. And I thought someday when it gets bad enough, I'll go to that AA meeting, and that will be the solution. AA will be the solution to my problem. And I went through a divorce about 20 years ago, and it was very painful to go through that. My wife said, "See you later, you don't come home, I'm out of here." Took my son, took the furniture, left me with an empty house. The house was probably maybe 30 by 30, a cottage more or less, with no furniture, and my son was gone. And what an uncomfortable spot to be. What a real uncomfortable spot to be, and what a total blessing from God to give me that desperation, that gift of desperation, to inspire me to change and do the necessary work that it requires to complete this process. and changed my life. So with that, I endeavored out onto a path of going to AA. And I went to these open meetings, and I was going to them, and I was able to maintain sobriety and not drink and not drug. And I was going, every day. And I had the desire to drink and drug, and I would ask people, what do I do? And they'd say, go to another meeting. And I got a sponsor. I picked, who's got the most sobriety in the room, and I got that sponsor. And he said, meet me at a meeting tomorrow night at the meeting in Hudson or whatever. I was going to every meeting, and I'd meet him at the meeting, and he'd kind of look at me, oh, you're here. And I'd say, yeah. And he'd say, sit in the front row and listen, and I'll talk to you at the break. And at the break, I'd be in front of him. He'd turn around and say, oh, back up a foot, And I was there, and I just really, really wanted this sobriety. And I did this for about almost a year, about 10 months. And towards the second half, they'd say double down, things like that, phrases that you might not find in the book, bless you. Things that you won't find in the book. There was all kinds of stuff like 90 and 90, and not against that at all. I think that's a great idea, but double your efforts, things like that. And I would do that. So now I'm coming up on close to 3/4 of a year, somewhere around there. I don't remember. I've always been impressed by people that know their sobriety date, which is probably everybody in here. If you were a chronic relapser like me and you changed your date once a week, once a month, you stop kind of keep track of it after a while. I think I've got this change jar at home, and once a year or whatever, I empty it out to cash in the change, and there's like 30 or 40 coins and key change in there. 1 day, 1 week, 30 days, and from 20 years ago, where I decided to press restart, and start that sobriety date over. And so I didn't keep track of the day that I got sober because, it never worked before. Why would it work this time? And as a result of that, towards the end of that sobriety period, the longest I had was almost a year, and I had been going to 14 meetings a week. And, I started to believe in the concept. Again, this is Andy's thinking, not what it says in the directions, the book. The textbook, the basic text, the book with the directions that we're reading out of tonight. Andy's thinking was, I think I figured this out. If you go to work and then you're at a meeting, all the other waking hours, you won't have time to drink. And that's kind of like the philosophy I went on, is if I just keep going to meetings, every time I have any energy whatsoever, I won't be able to hang around bars and crack houses. And so that's what I did. That didn't work. I met a woman there and started going out with her. Didn't really know her that well, but didn't want to be alone with Andy. Was uncomfortable being alone with Andy, and we got into a relationship. An adult relationship after about 5 days or whatever it was. Like the direction says in this book, if our behavior continues to hurt others, we will drink again. And that's what happened to me, is I did drink again. And, I was as nice as I knew how to be to that person. I said what I said to get what I thought Andy wanted. And again, my behavior hurt that person. And like the directions say in this morning's reading, is we will drink again. And that's what happened, is I did drink again. I did end up back in a crack house in the basement of a 3-decker here in Worcester with a dirt floor at 4 in the morning. And that went on for months. And then one day I was at a noontime meeting, and I met up with a guy, and I had just lost my license too on top of this. Now I'm trying to stay sober, and I got a letter from the registry saying you've lost your license. And at the time, you had to turn in your license. It wasn't electronic. And they said, turn in your license at the registry, the nearest registry. You have 2 weeks or something. So they give you a little bit of time. I don't know if that was on purpose or to give you time to figure things out. But I just remember looking up at the end of, I looked up, I was at my mailbox looking at this letter, and I said, God, now what, And this is, I only talked to God randomly, and this was the complaint time, so I was talking to God. And I was saying, now what, God? I can't stay sober. Now I can't even get to meetings. Now I don't have a chance. And I went off to that noontime meeting in Clinton, Mass, and a guy identified himself, Rob, and he said, I just got my license back after 7 years, and I've been sober, and I'm looking for a job, and I have a construction company, and I hired him to be an employee slash driver. And I said, well, you don't have a license, and I don't have a license, you don't have a car, you can take my brand new truck home and pick me up and drive me to meetings. And so he said, okay. So that week, I don't know if it was that night or the next day, but we were going to a lot of meetings together, and he had brought me to the Thursday night meeting in Framingham, which is at a different location right now, a Big Book Step Study meeting. And he said, you can't talk in here. And I said, oh, I heard about the AA Nazis, I know. Because I had been to a lot of meetings at this point. And he told me that you can't talk. So I had a contempt prior to investigation. I had already made an opinion. It wasn't a good meeting before I even got in the door. And when we got out of the door, he said, what do you think? I said, I think it sucked. I said, I kind of know what to do. I'm running a successful business. I got a house with no furniture and no kids and no family, and I got the heat on in there, so I'm pretty much all set here. And we continued going out to the meetings, and I remember going home and praying, and I had God in my life, and I didn't have a conscious contact with that God. God's always been in my life. He's in everybody's life, and whether or not we can contact him and understand that is based on our dedication to working these principles into our steps. Is for me, that's how it works. I don't know about for anybody else, but I asked God for help that night, and I said, God, guide me in the right direction, because I'm at another dead-end street. I'm at these meetings that I don't want to be at. I'm hanging around with people that I don't want to be with. They're talking about God. They're talking about just going to another meeting. There's no excitement here. Give me something that's exciting or something. And to relate to tonight's topic, like I'll stay sober if I have a girlfriend. Maybe that would help. And that kind of thinking was going through my head. So anyways, I prayed, and I asked God for help. And I woke up in the morning, and he picked me up at 6:30 or something to go at 6 o'clock or something to go to our morning meeting, and then off to work, and then to our lunch meeting, and then off to work, and then off to our night meeting. That was kind of our schedule. And he picked me up, and he said to me, what meeting do you want to go to? And at the time, there was a Friday night meeting in Somerville. And we had talked about it previously in men's meeting. And he said, what meeting do you want to go to? And again, the difference between him asking me, how was that meeting on Thursday night, and what meeting do you want to go to on Friday, was that I asked God for help. That was the only difference. And when I asked God for help, what came into my mind was, let's go to that Big Book Step Study in Somerville. And he smiled at me, and we were driving down the road, and we just smiled at each other. And, I always think of it the same way, and you guys have probably heard me say this before, but I always think of it like a Valentine's Day, like me looking at Mary and just kind of smiling. And we smiled at each other. And we didn't say anything to like two people in love, and just up over with the sun coming up in the background, And we went off to work and then continued on, and I went to that meeting that night, and I heard the truth. A lot of men there. There was probably, at that point, 75 men there, and they were talking about the truth, and what a freedom. What a freedom to be able to hear the truth spoken with a group of men that were, construction workers and lawyers and dentists that I've met, that I've come to meet since then, bless you. And what a gift to be able to hear the truth. The truth really will set you free, is what I found out. And they were talking about their feelings. They weren't trying to say what other people thought that they should hear. They were talking about how they felt and what they did about it. And powerful stuff, the truth is. Just simple, basic truth. And starting to learn from that foundation, that principle of, I don't have to change the way that I feel depending on which group I'm in. I can just be Andy and be comfortable with that, and know that all the experiences that led up to this point were all my best. Although they didn't turn out well often, and they didn't turn out very often well for the other people involved, they were my best. That was the best that I knew at that time. So That's how I got my start in this part of the program, which is the basic text, which is the original way that this was done here. Following the directions out of the textbook seems pretty simple. So I studied these first 103 pages with a sponsor. I did the writing. We did the first and second prayer. We came to the conclusion that, maybe everything isn't revolving around Andy. Maybe there is a higher power. Real important in that second step that he pointed out the willingness. Are you willing to believe that there's an easier way? That's what he pointed out. And that's what I point out with the guys that I work with now. If I can show you that there's an easier way, are you willing to grasp on and live by this concept, this set of principles? And I don't even use the word God. I just say, if I can show you an easier way, are you willing? And they're like, yeah, I'm willing to do that if there's an easier way. And that's how it was presented to me. And that easier way was developing and maintaining a relationship with God. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I came to these meetings. And as a result of following the directions and following my sponsor's guidance and coming to the meeting and listening to the experts was such an important part of my sobriety. Not just having one teacher, having 100 teachers, having people that went before myself, and going to Marshfield and hearing that group of people talk about that meeting's been gone for 15 years or something, but hearing those guys telling the truth, going to Somerville, going to the Wednesday night men's meeting, and hearing the truth over and over, and listening to those experts, those people that have experience incorporating these principles into their life and how they applied them to relationships in their life and what the results were, was catastrophic in my recovery. Reading this book, I'm very dyslexic. I can barely read this book. I can't see it anymore, so when I'm looking at it, I'm pretending that I'm reading. But I do. I did read it for a long time, so I have a good idea of what's in there for text, what it talks about in tonight's reading on the third part of the fourth step on the sex part. And before I get into that part, I remember coming here and hearing them talk about relationships with others, resentments, fear. I remember them talking about sex conduct, and I was thinking, sitting in the back of the room, thinking, I don't really want that part of the program. I just want to stay sober. I thought that there were two separate parts. I thought that I could live the life I want and treat people the way that I wanted, which really I didn't define it like that. I thought it was a win-win situation when I had a relationship with a woman. I thought it was a win-win. They benefited too. So what's the big deal? Was my thinking, and I didn't realize that this was the most intimate relationship. This sex conduct was the most intimate relationship that you can get into, and that's why it's separated out. It's the deepest emotional level that we can deal with another human being on, and I didn't realize that. So I just wanted the sobriety, and I thought, I'm not going to stop with the tough guy attitude. I still want to be able to, maybe in traffic, if something goes wrong, get in a fight with someone. I still want to be able to, if I meet someone that I'm attracted to, not have any limits on what we do with our relationship and not have any rules about following up with that relationship or telling the truth during that relationship. I thought I could just continue to live that lifestyle and be sober and be clean from drugs. I thought maybe that would work out that way. So I was just a la carte, looking for just part of the program. But I didn't realize that the two went together. I didn't realize that drugs, alcohol, sex conduct was a byproduct of the way that I was living my life, was leaving me feeling uncomfortable, and I was trying to artificially change the way that I feel. I didn't put those two together for a long time. What I did do is became desperate enough to follow the directions. And I wasn't smart, I wasn't nice, and I wasn't spiritual. And I came in here and I followed the directions, and my sponsor went over the first couple steps and said, "Are you willing to believe?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm willing if there's something easier." We said the third step prayer together, in Braintree at the men's meeting there. There used to be a women's meeting there on Wednesday night. Not a women's, co-ed on Wednesday, but the men's meeting's still there on Monday night in Braintree. So I was going to Braintree, which was about 100 miles round trip, and I became the secretary there while I was doing my writing. and I live in Berlin. There's all kinds of Marlboro meetings and meetings all over the place. But for me, it became clear that it was about quality, not quantity. It wasn't about how many meetings I went to. It was about what meetings have a solution. That's what it was about. It was about not talking about the problem, but talking about the solution like we're here doing this morning. And we went through the writing, and I started to do the writing, the resentments, and subjecting each one to, why and what was the cause, and what it affected. And then I was to, like it says in the book, I was prepared to take a look at it from an entirely different angle. We nicknamed that the turnarounds. And I started looking at what was my part in those relationships. And I had a hard time seeing that, especially when I got to the dishonest. Where was I dishonest? I'm like, look, to my sponsor, this was just a drug deal. I was willing to pay for the drugs. And he's looking at me, and my sponsor was a scientist, didn't do drugs ever in his life. Very, very nice spiritual guy, but kind of a geeky guy, and very good for me. And I was like, it was just a drug deal. It was just a crack deal at 3 a.m, and the guy pulled the gun on me, and I had my $100, and he's saying, well, where were you dishonest? I'm like, I don't know. I just wanted $100 worth of crack. And he's like, you really, truly don't see the truth? I'm like, that is the truth. And he's like, a drug deal's dishonest, Andy. The whole deal itself was dishonest right out of the gate. So it's a dishonest start. There can't be an honest part in there. You were seeking an alternative way to change the way that you feel. You were doing an illegal transaction in South Main Street in Worcester in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and you're wondering why it didn't go well, That's kind of like, that's just, if we had more time, I could tell you about 50 other situations. Like, I just couldn't see, why doesn't it go my way? Why doesn't my ex-wife just waive child support and say, I'll just handle it myself? And things like that were going through my head. Those are concepts that I thought were good ideas. I would brainstorm about. But so I went through, which was very necessary, the order that this was put in, and I did the turnarounds, and I looked at what my part was. And at first, I didn't get it. And one of my fears was I won't have enough examples to do this because I'm not really that angry of a person. And that fear slipped away at about 1,000 resentments. It started to slip away. I said, I think I'm going to have enough here. And, and it took me 2 years to do the writing, and it didn't need to take 2 years, but it needed to take me 2 years. Because during that 2-year period, very regular basis, I went to meetings like this, and I listened to speakers tell the truth. Not speakers just at the table, but the speakers in the audience. And they told me from different perspectives, and I needed to hear from different perspectives. I needed to hear a little bit from this guy, a little bit from this guy, a little bit from this guy, on how their experience was with this process and what their truth was. For me to understand it, I needed to have if an average person could do it with one teacher, I needed to have 25 teachers explain this to me for me to get this stuff. And that's how this program's laid out. It's laid out where we share and help each other, and we share our wisdom, not our knowledge, but our wisdom with each other on how we were, what we did, and what we're like now. And so I went through that, and I did it, and I did the turnarounds, and I started to see where was I being selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and fearful, and I did the fears, and I looked at, I asked the questions there, and then I got to the sex conduct part, and during this writing, by the way, probably until I got to the turnarounds, I was really, honestly, this is honest, I was thinking, when I had a hard life, I grew up in a dysfunctional family. My older brothers gave me an opportunity to smoke pot at 10 years old or 9 years old, and I was drinking and stuff by 10, 11 years old. So I had already quit for a couple of years by the time I was 13. So now I got back into it full swing by then. And I got caught by my mother or something, and I quit for a couple of years. And anyways, I had already had an opportunity to be involved in this, and when I got into the turnarounds and I was starting to see the truth and everything, he showed me this part here, sex conduct, and he told me to write down the list. And I was seriously thinking, not just on the sex part, on the whole fourth step in general. Early on in that process, or when I say early on, I'm talking my first year of writing. I was really thinking, when my sponsor reads this, he's going to see the truth that I didn't get dealt a real good hand of cards. And he's probably going to say, yeah, Andy, you got a pass on this one. You had a rough life. I thought maybe that was what he was going to see, because that's the way that my perception was. That if anybody knew how I had it, they'd understand why I go through what I go through, and how I ended up in jail and whatever happened in my life, and divorced, and all the other hardships. But I didn't realize that I played a part in them, and that I was the person that orchestrated that. I didn't realize that my thoughts turned into my actions, and my actions were what was causing everything that happened in my life. I didn't realize that. So today what I realize is that I need to change my thinking in order to change my my actions. And that's what this book is about. So we got to this the third part here, where it was the sex conduct, which today steps on. And I had a lot of fear about this part here, and I remember saying, I had a big list, and on my list was probably a half a dozen or less girlfriends, and then a bunch of people I didn't know, and there were some guys on that list, and I didn't want to talk about that, because that's stuff that I was going to my grave with. I was never, ever talking about that and telling anybody, never mind a group of people that I don't know, most of you guys, because that stuff ruled my life, and that stuff doesn't own me anymore today. That stuff doesn't own me, because I did this process, and God's in my life today. And, I don't really share stuff about, I don't need to get into details, but where there was maybe a dog involved or something like that. I don't need to really share that at the Thanksgiving table with my family. But if I think that it could be of help to someone in a group that might be suffering and can't find the way out and can't find the way to stay sober, and they find out what those men told me at that meeting, they told me the truth, and that it's okay to tell the truth, then that's my experience. And that's why I share these things today, is to maybe one person in today's audience here will hear something that will inspire them to write down something that they're struggling with and put that truth down on paper and get out of that bondage of self and move forward so that they can be of service to others. So I wrote down that list, and I wasn't proud of that list. And during that list, now again, it took me a year and a half to get to that list, so on that way I said, hey, guys that were ahead of me at the meeting I used to drive with and stuff to Braintree and stuff, hour-long rides and stuff, and I'd say, hey, what's up with the sex part? And they'd say, hey, how's your resentments going? And I'd say, oh, yeah, but I just wanted to know, because I wanted to polish that up a little bit. What are we going to do with it? Afterwards. I might have wanted to edit it a little bit. And he's like, oh, how's your sponsor? How's John doing? And I'd say, good. And he'd say, what step you on? They say, stick with the step you're on. Keep writing those resentments, Andy. And I'd say, oh, asshole. And I'd go, he's just blowing me off. And I go, so the next, I'd get to the meeting 15 minutes early and be helping with the coffee or something. I'd say, hey, you got a minute? And the guy would say, sure. What's up, Andy? And I'd say, on the sex part, you really just can list people by groups. If it was just women from bars, can I just write women from bars? He's like, no, you got to write every name. And I'd say, yeah, and he'd say, what step you on? And I'd say, well, I'm doing my turnarounds, but it's taking a long time. And I just was kind of looking ahead, reading ahead a little bit, trying to prepare myself. I didn't tell him to edit it, but he's like, just focus on the step that you're on. Just focus on the step that you're on, you'll be there. And my message today is that when you get to that scary part, if you haven't done this yet, and you get to that part, whatever part it is for you, that seems scary, that you're afraid of, that you have fear, picturing the future without God in it is the way that I like to define that. So if you're at that part, my experience was when I got to that part, I was on a completely different plateau, completely different level. I was on a basis of trusting and relying on God. It took me 2 years to write for a reason. I needed to go and hear the truth and start to trust and rely. I needed to say the third step prayer every day and the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting every day. I needed to start incorporating this stuff into my life to build that relationship with a higher power, with God, in order to be able to complete this process accurately and honestly. And that's what I needed to do to be freed from the bondage of self. So I continued on with this list, and I thought it was going to be like an explicit list of what did you do, and it wasn't. It was about how did my behavior hurt others. I subjected each name to the 9 questions there on page 69. Whom did I hurt? Where was I selfish, dishonest? Where was I inconsiderate? Those questions to each name. And it wasn't like hard stuff. It was just very, very clear to write that down. And I could see how my behavior hurt others. And at the beginning of that list, it was like, okay, and I'm working with my sponsor. I'm like, okay, I lied to get what I wanted. So therefore, I hurt that other person. He's like, good job, Andy. Write it down. And, as I moved through this, and again, this whatever it was, I'll make it up, 50-hour task, I'm dragging it out over 6 months. Saying I'm doing every day. I put my 5 minutes in today, so I'm dragging it out. But I'm going to these meetings at the same time. By the time I got to the other end of that list, or the middle of that list from where I hurt that other person became I hurt that other person. I hurt that other person's children. I hurt that other person's boyfriend. I hurt that other person's whole circle and community that cares about them. So that list of who I hurt, that insight became much larger as I started to trust and rely on God. And I started to realize how I was that tornado roaring through the lives of others. I started realizing that, and I started to realize it started to come during my times of meditation into my mind. It started to come into my mind as a concept that if I continue to hurt others, that I'm going to constantly want to artificially change the way that I feel. That the only way out of that is to build a relationship with a higher power that's going to guide me in the direction where I stop harming others. And then, as a result of not harming others, I won't be constantly trying to artificially change the way that I feel. And I didn't realize that. So taking a shot of gasoline, which is equivalent to the stuff that I was drinking, Wild Turkey and 151 rum and stuff like that, same taste. So I wouldn't go out and take a shot of gasoline. When I look at alcohol today, I'd rather have a Coca-Cola or a water. It's not attractive to me anymore because today I do need to. It's a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition, and I do spend time every day. I set my alarm clock to get up to do prayer and meditation because I feel better when I do that. And I'm excited to do it. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm totally, totally excited when I wake up in the morning and I say, I have an hour and a half before work, and I can sit and I'm going to read and do some contemplative meditation. And that contemplative meditation that I'm going to do, or that focused meditation, whatever I'm doing, whether I'm focusing on my breath, whatever type of meditation I'm doing that morning, I know that meditation is going to turn into awareness. And that awareness is going to be like panning out. It's not going to be all about Andy. It's going to be all about the community that I'm going to be involved with throughout that day. Those employees, those customers, my ex-wives with an S on the end, asking me for money and me saying, instead of saying no, I paid my child support, saying, okay, I'll see what I can do. That's not like an answer that I would typically come up with. That's a situation that came up the other day. And, that I had the opportunity to say, look, I paid what I'm supposed to pay. That's it. Slam, hang up. That's Andy's first thought. Instead, I paused. I paused. And in that pause is God. God's in that pause. So when I take these relationships, whether it's my sex conduct or it's a new relationship that I'm in, dating a woman, and I pause and I say, what would God want me to do in this situation? It's a different reaction than what would Andy want out of this relationship. It's a totally different concept. And that's what I need to do, whether, we're breaking it down to the deepest, most intimate part of human relations, sex conduct today. And very strongly believe that it needs its own day and its own chapter. But it's how I treat other people is how I'm going to be left feeling. And today, I'm going to end with this, is my message is the same message that I always have, is that you don't need to understand this stuff. You don't need to be nice, and you don't need to be spiritual for this stuff to change your life. That's been my experience. You just need to come here. You need to get a sponsor, a guide, that knows their way around these first 103 pages, and you need to follow the directions. And if you follow the directions, you get the results, whether you want to or not. Like coming in this room and turning on the light switch and getting light, you don't need to be an electrician to do that. You just need to do the work, and you get the results. Thanks for listening.